And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Wednesday morning's flying weather graphic shows a lot of IFR out here from the Bering Strait all the way down across the sea there to all of the Aleutians. And then much better as you head in toward the coastline, becoming marginal VFR, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Good VFR in the interior all the way up and beyond the Arctic coast there. And then IFR with that storm coming northward right along the east side of Kodiak Island up into the Barren Islands and reaching the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula and getting quite close to the North Gulf Coast. And for the afternoon, that area edges eastward and northward, just making it onto the North Gulf Coast there into western southern Prince William Sound, back down along the east side of Kodiak Island, becoming marginal VFR over northern Prince William Sound, and VFR, Cook Inlet, Manusca, Sinton Valley, Copper River Basin, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Southeast coast, mostly VFR, some marginal VFR on the north coast, and then just solid IFR out here over the Bering Sea right up to the southwest coast, through the Bering Strait, northward there into the Chukchi Sea, very close to Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. And for Thursday morning, this area of IFR edges inland a little bit there into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and up toward Togiak, maybe Dillingham, down to the Alaska Peninsula. Still pretty well solid IFR for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. VFR holding over the interior. Marginal VFR up along the eastern slopes of the Alaska Range here, up to about Denali Park there. And then IFR really holding along the North Gulf Coast with just marginal VFR into Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet, with marginal VFR now over the northern three-quarters of the southeast coast, with IFR along the entire coastline there and covering the Gulf of Alaska. And for the afternoon, got some IFR shifts eastward here to the eastern border of the southeast coast, with a band of IFR lingering along the coastline there up into the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula, and now some IFR showing up on the Alaska Range in this area with good VFR again, all the way up to the Arctic coast in the interior. And IFR holds, not much change over the next couple of days out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. IFR now up in across all of Bristol Bay. And the passes tomorrow, Anatuvik and Adigan, Brooks Range, VFR looking good there next couple of days actually. And for the Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR becoming marginal VFR, especially on the eastern entrance of both passes, that same pattern. Also forecast for rainy with lowering conditions in the afternoon on the eastern entrance. Windy, VFR. Isabel, same forecast, VFR. Mentasta, VFR. And Tanita, VFR becoming marginal VFR into the afternoon toward evening, and Portage, marginal VFR trending toward IFR, especially on that eastern entrance late in the day. And for Chilkoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels about 10 to 12,000 feet here across the southeast coast. Over the interior, right around 6,000 feet here, down to 8,000 or up to 8,000 feet across the Kenai Peninsula and Bristol Bay, and then out over the Bering Sea, 8 to 12,000 feet with 14,000 feet just south of the Aleutians. Icing, look for areas of isolated moderate rime icing or mixed icing here, Alaska Peninsula, up the west coast of the Bering Strait there, covering the eastern Bering Sea, and then heavier icing with that moisture coming northward along in advance of the front there, right along over the eastern Gulf of Alaska, possibly up in toward Yakutat, and then from Prince William Sound across the Kenai Peninsula down toward Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. And from there, moving on to the jet stream. There we go. Several lows here at 33,000 feet from the Bering Sea. This one coming northward across Kodiak Island. Southerly jet here up to 95 knots reaching Yakutat with the stronger wind still down to the south. Otherwise, southeast interior, 65 knots out of the south and then lighter elsewhere. Out to the west, a good westerly flow here just south of the Aleutians, 120 to 140 knots. And at 9,000 feet, again, the stronger winds along and south of the Aleutians out here at about 50 to 55 knots, 40 knots as you get up toward maybe, well, actually south of the Pribilofs. And then winds southeast more or less 35 to 55 knots, strongest down here over south central Alaska, and 35 knots coming up across the Alaska Range there and the White Mountains toward the Yukon Flats, 40 knot southerlies into the Panhandle. And for 3,000 feet, 60 knot east-southeast winds in that band right along the North Gulf Coast there. Strongest coming in toward Prince William Sound, dropping back to about 40 knots there along the north coast of the Panhandle. This low coming northward here toward Kodiak Island, and we've got east-southeast winds 45 knots, becoming more southerly at 40 knots along the west coast, Seward Peninsula. And then west or west-northwesterlies out over the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians up to about 40 knots. And with those winds out there, light to Haisley and moderate turbulence from False Pass all the way out to Shimia and at Two Islands. And then looking at considerable moderate turbulence here, narrow band along the southeast coast up toward Yakutat, kind of expanding into Prince William Sound. Looks like a pretty bumpy flying day for all of Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, Turnagain Arm area, probably the Manuska Valley as well. And that extends into the southwest interior.